Howdy peeps. You could kind of say this is a Christmas special, but it isn't. um, so I did a video last night and I sort of reviewed it and I thought, well, I think I can do better, to be fair. I wanted to talk a bit more about the relationships that we have in more everyday life, and in particular friendships with, air quotes, friendships with co-workers. Now this is something that I think a lot of people take far too far, and I'll include myself. I've done this in the past, and a lot of people might not like to hear this because you spend anywhere between 8 or more hours a day with these people on a regular basis, and I guess it kind of makes me sound like I'm being a bit sort of negative towards the situation, but I'm being more sort of realistic. And I'm going to use a few examples as to how what I mean when I say your co-workers aren't necessarily your friends. Well, for starters, I've worked in lots of different places all over the place, all over the country, and been in and seen many different sort of situationships, I suppose. In whereas a group of guys have been friends prior to working together, and then they, one of them needs a job, one of them's got a job, that place is looking for someone, so they'll recommend a friend because that this is more to do with the breakdown of a dynamic friendship. So they'll invite their friend in, get them an interview, and get them working there with them. Now this poses its own set of risks. One thing that people say to me, like companies that I've worked for, is, oh, if you know anyone, that's willing and able, we need a few more hands on deck sort of thing, so bring them in. The first thing I tell them is no. And it's for this reason, right? It's for this reason. You see, a lot of the time, excuse the lighting, is having a bit of a fit at the moment. In fact, excuse me a second, I'm just going to deal with that quick. There we go, I've taken the lightning effects off and we're good to go now. And I've sorted my beanie out as well, so I look more like a thug. But anyway, so yeah, I've had people that they're like, oh yeah, if you know anyone, get give them a shout, bring them on board, and yada yada. And this might be someone that you're actually friends with in, like, outside of work, and you've known for many years, and you might not have necessarily have worked with them, but you've heard lots of stories about what they're like when they're at work. So I suppose maybe out of the kindness of your heart, you give them a heads up, you're looking for somewhere, and then they end up working with you. Now the reason I don't recommend that scenario is because it's a situation that I've even been in recently, and I don't argue with people over this, but whereas they've taken someone on that was a friend of a friend or something like that, and they've heard all the stories about they can do this, that and the other, and they're really good at it and blah blah blah, and then when they take them on and they get the sort of full-time employment, they realise that they don't have any actual real intention of doing what they're paid to do. Yeah, sure, they might turn up, if you're lucky they might turn up on time, but other than that, they end up becoming a bit of a dead weight for the rest of the workforce. You end up carrying them because they can't be bothered. And like I say, it comes to that thing of, when, I suppose to relate it a bit to more the side of things that I know about, it's like you sponsor someone, so you put your neck on the chopping block, as it were, and you say, yeah, this person's alright, take them on, they're good at what they do. And then when that turns out to not be the case, the finger gets pointed at you because you said that, oh, they were good at this, oh, they could do all of these things, oh, you know. So your own, not necessarily reputation, but maybe judgment of character, maybe, that gets taken more into the equation. And this is something that I've pointed out with people in places where I've worked, you know, and whereas someone else has recommended someone and they've come along and they've just not been as efficient, whether willingly or not. They haven't been as good as what everyone had hoped. And oftentimes I point this out. I'm like, well, you took them on. This was down to you. You made the decision. You know, complaining to me about it now, about their lack of maybe ethics or morals when it comes down to workplace, whether it's timekeeping, quality of work, quantity of work, all of that. So I just silence this up. There we go. You know, it's just not. It's just not there. And so that's just sort of one side of it. And a lot of the time they'll get past the, and again, this is the other sort of problem, especially where it's a business, and whereas they've taken on a friend of theirs, right? I think then it becomes harder for them to give them the boot, as it were, i.e. Relieve them of their duties, and it's because there's that outside of work friendship. You know, they're keeping them on despite the fact that they're not as good or not as efficient or whatever as what they were promised to be, or at least what they'd hoped to be. Because you see, in that instance, if you do drop them from the company, then that's going to have a knock-on effect on the outside, right? On the outside relationship of friendship. And whereas they won't actually see it as they got let go because of their inefficiency or whatever, they'll just see it as, well, you sacked me. You know, you've caused me to be unemployed. Not that they did it to themselves. And I think a lot of time people aren't willing to accept that. It's that, you know, for starters, they just turn up and mess around rather than doing what they're supposed to be doing, knowing that they're going to get away with it because maybe they're friends with the business owner or the manager and the line manager or whatever the case may be. So they're reliant on that friendship in keeping them employed. At the same time, because there's I suppose I use this quite lightly, an emotional investment in the friendship, and whereas you kind of feel sorry for them, so you don't want to sack them either. And as a result, you end up keeping them long term, and you might get other employees come and go who just come in, see the situation from an outsider's point of view, and you know, it's just not a good place to be, because everyone else ends up picking up the slack for the one that can't be bothered to do their job. You know, because they'd rather mess about, they don't want to take the job seriously, and all of that. And then there's the other side. Which usually reveals who your friends are and aren't in sort of work. And it's usually around about holiday time. And a holiday time is always a difficult one anyway, because usually, obviously a lot of guys have got families, have got children, so they will want at least 1 week off during the holidays to see their kids, to spend, you know, it's understandable, right? This is a problem, I think, for a lot of single guys that don't have that responsibility. They don't have kids to see, and whereas they'll get put back, they won't get what the holiday time that they want to spend however they please, which at the end of the day is no one else's business but their own anyway. But then this is just it. A lot of people do sort of use the. I suppose it's not necessarily an excuse, and like I say, it is kind of understandable. At the same time, that relationship that you have with your co-workers, when it comes to taking time off, if one gets prioritised over another, then that's going to cause a bit of dysfunction within the workforce as well, because one's going to get the that one can have the time off and the other couldn't, and it's sort of understandable. And this is something that I've seen quite often, and I've even, as I'm sure many of you guys might have been in this situation, whereas you get put back to the sort of bottom of the list because you don't have a family, right? Because you haven't got kids to see or spend time with. So as far as the company's concerned, you're less of a priority in terms of having time off, which I think is wrong, because I think everyone should be allowed time off. But that in itself will cause a rift between workers, and this is something I've seen time and time again, to the point where goes back to like co-workers not really being your friends, whereas if one doesn't get their way, they will be quite happy to throw you under the bus, metaphorically speaking, and put you in real difficult situations. And then as a result of that, not only do you, look, you might get the time off that you asked for, you might not, and you could end up with a bit of a negative feeling as a result of that, if you don't get the time off, because they're prioritising someone else. And it's even worse when it's like, well, if the other person is that individual that doesn't pull their weight, doesn't, provide as much efficient work, then they're not that as efficient at what they do, and they get then rewarded, as it were, with the time off that you might have actually wanted. Well, that's going to cause a rift, in the same that if you get the time off and the other person doesn't, like I say, they're usually quite happy to just throw you under the bus and screw the consequences, and then they wonder why they end up in a situation where that relationship breaks down. You might stop talking to each other, and all of this. I think it's even worse when there's a preference towards things, preferential treatment between staff members. Now, I've generally seen this more within sort of managerial roles, and I think at the moment there's a lot of this going on. I was speaking to some of my friends a couple of days ago, and it was a group. I've worked with them, and it's difficult for me because generally speaking I get on with all of them, but I think I get on with all of them because I don't work with them. I'm an outsider, so although I have worked with them, I'm not vested in that in that same way. So you get the sort of guys that don't want to pull their weight, and then you get the guys that also don't want to pull their weight, but they do more than the other. And then you get the guys that are just flat out grafters, and I said grafters, not grifters. They're grafters. They work hard. They want to get the job done. They want to get the one out, next one in, that sort of a thing. And they end up carrying a few people, and this upsets people as well, because, and there's all sorts of reasons for this. It's not just the fact that they're carrying them. Sometimes it's like not only they're carrying them, but the other person is actually, the one that they're carrying is actually getting more pay, or they seem to have better benefits, or maybe a better relationship with the manager, which puts them in, I suppose, favourable odds, should we say, which is then going to upset other members in the workforce. And if truth be told, over the last sort of couple of years, I've seen a couple of instances where guys that I've known to be friends outside of work as well, those relationships have just fallen apart. Whereas you get one guy who gets to call the shots as to who has time off when, and you could argue this is sort of managerial, I suppose. And I've seen this in a lot of places where I suppose you kind of expect them to put themselves first, right? Rather than thinking the rest of the team. And the thing is, I think what they don't quite get, maybe, or maybe what they don't care about, is a lot of times not only are they getting paid more money and they get maybe more time off, maybe it's through time served within a company, or maybe it's just because of the job role, but they get that more time off, and when it comes to other members of staff needing that time off, they won't give it to them. They'll give it to their air quotes favourite members of staff, regardless of how good or not so good they might be at their job. And again, this is where these friendships at work really tend to fall to pieces. You know, it's because you see a different side of them, and a lot of the time people use the guise of, oh well, this is my role and I have to make these decisions, and it's like, yeah, you kind of do, but when you're giving, I suppose, favours to ones that you like more, you got a bit of favouritism going on there, it will cause that rift, and then the friendships outside of work will break down, and then you will get a level of resentment, you know, from all different angles and for very different reasons. You're going to get the hard workers that maybe are carrying people who end up resentful because not only are they carrying someone and getting paid the same or maybe less, but the person that they're carrying also gets extra benefits on top, like time off whenever they want it, you know, without question. And like I say, when it comes down to these scenarios and you see people getting thrown under the bus by people that are supposed to be your friends, just because you spend 8 hours or more a day with them doesn't make them your friend. You know, it makes them a familiar, sure, because you're familiar with them. But at the end of the day, the difference between a friend and a co-worker is your friend has got your best interests at heart and will try and work something so that it can be a two-way street, as amicable as possible. But that's not what tends to happen. Like I say, you get a build-up of resentment and you get a couple of people hating, maybe that's a bit strong, but having a serious distaste or dislike for each other as a result of these rifts at work. Like I say, ultimately I think you can't really make friends with people at work, because when it comes to it, especially like I say, holiday time and stuff like that, you know, that is when you will really see people for who they really are, you know, whether it's throwing you under the bus, or putting themselves in a position where they knew that you wanted the time off, and they'll put themselves in a situation where, you know, they're friendly with the manager or something like that, and then as a result, you know, you end up getting put to the back, and then you end up with that resentment. You know, it's honestly, it's such a difficult situation, and I think in some cases, you know, some companies have asked me to go and work for them because I know the guys really well and I get on with them really well. But I think, if truth be told, they wouldn't like me if I was in a managerial position, because I wouldn't be there to make friends. I'll be there to go in and get a job done. And I think that is what a lot of people make this mistake of. It's great if you can get along with your friend, with your co-workers, but I think ultimately, you know, and again, like I say, you'll see the much darker, sinister side to these friends that you think you have when you're working with them. You know, you'll see them at their absolute worst, throwing you under the bus, grassing you up for things, you know, to make themselves either look better or to cover their own mistakes. And it's just what a situation to be in. It's not nice. But like I say, when I've refused some of these places as managerials, to be in a manager's position, I've refused it because I actually like the guys and I value the friendships that I have with the guys more than what I would the managerial role, because at the end of the day, especially if you're working for a big company, if that company decide that if they don't like you being a bit standoffish with them, which would be a thing for me, you know, they might decide to replace you, you know, because again they've got their best interests at, well, not necessarily their best interests at heart, but usually finances. And if you're causing them some sort of problem, it's easier to get rid of the problem and replace it with someone else. And like I say, if you've gone into a workforce where you've known everyone and you've been friends outside of work, and then you start telling them what to do, and they see the more managerial side of you, should I say, then they're going to end up probably disliking you, and you're going to end up not only losing a lot of friends as a result, but potentially when you stand up to your superiors, you could end up losing your job as well. So it really is a catch-22, right? So in all, this is why you can't really be friends with your co-workers. You know, it's nice to have that ideal, but realistically it's not going to work, because you're not there to be friends. You know, you're not there to have friendship. You're not there for a laugh. If you can get on with everyone to get through the day, it's one thing. But don't confuse them as being your friends, because that's when you put yourself in a very vulnerable position. You know, like I say, there's people out there that they've got not necessarily bad intentions from the get-go, but they've also got no issue in trying to throw you under the bus, and, you know, for the sake of their own betterment or their own advantage, whether it's holidays pay or whatever. You know, so ultimately this is why you don't confuse friendships with co-workers a lot of the time. You know, there are a few exceptions to these, of course, but, you know, ultimately the stress it causes to any individual that's in that situation, it's just not worth it. You know, you might have your own stresses from your own family life or outside of work life, and then when you go into that stressful situation as well, it's just not helpful. You know, it's like to quote myself from many years ago, when I was having it out with a manager who did exactly that. They threw me under the bus, and I said to them, I said, look, I said, there's two things going on here. I said, I've got aggro and hassle when I'm going home from work from the missus. This is previously. I said, I'm coming into work and getting attitude as well. I said, something's got to give, and, you know, the way I see it is, I currently have a house, I've got a roof over my head, and either you guys change your attitude or I'm gone. And they weren't going to change their attitude, and I knew that, you know, because these people are who they are. You know, they're not going to generally just change. So in the end, I opted between handing in my notice at work, and there was more to it than just that. But the point being is, you can't have too much stress in too many places, otherwise it wears you down, it breaks you. And then this is when you end up with, like, mental health issues and so on, you know, depression and anxiety and everything else. And it's just not a good place to be. But this is why, you know, you can't really confuse your co-workers as being your friends sometimes, or you can't have friends from outside come in and be your friends at work, because it's usually a matter of time before things start to break down and that friendship ends. You know, it's just one of them. And this is why I don't recommend people to places that I work. So, oh, do you know anyone? I'm like, yeah, I know plenty of people, but I'm not putting them forward, because, you know, ultimately, not only would my head be on the chopping block because, oh yeah, you said they're a good worker, but there's every chance that they might turn on me and throw me under the bus for their own gain and betterment. Which is, I mean, look, it would tell me everything I needed to know about that person at that point, but at that point you're also picking up the pieces and trying to start again somewhere else, probably, right? So, anyway, just was something I wanted to talk about on this one. So, thoughts, comments and opinions, feel free to jump down to the next one. Stay cool, stay free. Peace out.